So we're coming up on Easter, and this is sort of a mostly taken from the book True Christian Religion. And the idea is there's a whole section on the Doctrine of Redemption, and it really pertains to this because, and I'm going to follow pretty much the starting or the way it lays it out for you. I'm going to do a brief reading first, to just sort of get the sense of where I'm going with this. This is from TCR. Redemption itself was a subjugation of the hells, a restoration of order in the heavens, and by means of these, preparation for a new spiritual church. Without that redemption, no one could have been saved, nor could the angels have continued in a state of integrity. In this wise, not only men, but angels were also redeemed by the Lord. And redemption was a work purely divine, and it could not have been accomplished except by God incarnated. The Passion of the Cross was the last temptation by which the Lord, as the greatest prophet, endured. Also, it was the means of glorifying his human, that is, of uniting it with the divine of the Father. But it was not redemption. The belief that the Passion of the Cross was redemption itself is the fundamental error of the Church. And this error, together with the error respecting three divine persons from eternity, has perverted the whole church to such an extent that nothing spiritual is left in it. So that sort of gives you the context of where I'm coming from, that the chapter itself starts off with statements about, well, we need to go from the common understanding in the Christian church of what redemption is, and then we can see the problem, and then we can go ahead and move ahead. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the traditional view of redemption, which includes the concept of original sin. And then I'll finish up with, of course, with the positive view, the new church view of redemption. So that's where we're going with this. So let's start off with this old church doctrine of redemption. And here's the teaching in TCR that the belief that the Passion of the Cross was redemption itself is the fundamental error of the church. And this error, together with the error respecting three divine persons from eternity, has perverted the whole church to such an extent that there's nothing spiritual left in it. And what we're talking about is at the present day, these doctrines, I'm going to read actually what TCR continues here. It says, what at the present day more fills and crams the books of the Orthodox, or what is more zealously taught and inculcated in the schools, or what is more frequently preached and proclaimed from the pulpit, than that God the Father, being angry with the human race, not only put it away from himself, but also included it under the universal damnation, and thus excommunicated it. But being gracious, he persuaded or inspired his Son to descend and take upon himself this damnation, and thus appease the anger of his Father, and that under no other conditions could the Father look with favor upon mankind. And further, that this was actually done by the Son, in that by taking upon himself the damnation of the human race, he suffered himself to be scourged, to be spit upon, and finally be crucified by the Jews as one accursed of God. And after this had been done, and the Father was propitiated, and from love for his Son canceled the damnation, but only on behalf of those for whom the Son might intercede, and that the Son thus might become a mediator perpetually before his Father. Now, has anybody seen any of that in the Old or New Testament? That is just doctrine that was developed over the years by the church. It's not from Revelation at all. It's not drawn from any scripture that I'm aware of. But nevertheless, it's been the policy, it's been the underlying doctrine that's underpinned the thinking of the Christian church. So, and we're influenced by that. We're influenced by that doctrine. It's not everybody's really aware of it, but it exists as an assumption in a lot of publication, and it lies at the bottom of a lot of thinking in the world. The faith alone thing is just all over the place, but that's a subject for another time, and it has to do with this. But it's we are, in one sense, a Christian nation in the sense that there are philosophical points that no one questions that have been brought over from this kind of thinking, and we have to watch out for them. That's part of the reason why the writings are here, is to say, look out for that idea. So one of the things that's very foundation here is that, that Adam sinned. So we have to deal with this issue of original sin, and what does that mean in the philosophy of the Christian church? And again, I'm talking about the doctrine of the church. I'm not talking about what your neighbor down the street might think. This is what the church teaches, or is the founding doctrine, whether or not it's being spoken of in the church today. But since Adam and Eve, since that time, and of course, the whole concept with the Christian church and their doctrine is that Adam and Eve were two real people. And they were, the first created human beings, and there they are in the garden. And because Eve took the advice of the serpent and offered the apple to Adam, all of us, you and me, everybody in the whole world is condemned to hell. Okay? God the Father has turned his back on us. He made two people, and they made one mistake, and he washed his hands of us. But on the other hand, well, there's also this issue of predestination falls into it. In the early days of the Presbyterian Church, particularly in the Reformation, they had this doctrine of predestination, and it was originally double predestination, which means God created everyone to either go to heaven or go to hell, and we have nothing to say about it. That's the way we are. We're destined to one or the other. And then later people said, we don't like that so much, and they became single predestination, saying God picks some people to go to heaven, and the others, they're on their own and they'll go to hell because of that, but he doesn't send them there. He just doesn't not send them there. And it's kind of a weird thing, but there it is, predestination. Everyone is predestined. Nothing, and again, the underlying philosophy of that is nothing that you or I do in our entire lives, not a single choice that we make, has any bearing on this. So Jesus, born from eternity, witnessed all this and disagreed with the Father about how to handle it. So Jesus came to earth to take our sin on himself and then die with it. And we also sometimes talk about atonement, and that means to be at one. In other words, to bring things together. He wants to bring us back together with himself. And there's also the old Jewish doctrine that this is alluding to, where at the I forget the name of the holiday, Rosh Hashanah, I think. The idea is they would select a goat, and the priest would ceremoniously or ritually put the sins of the congregation on the goat, and then it would be turned loose to wander in the wilderness, presumably to die, and it would take all the sins with it, and they would be cleansed by that. So in one sense, Jesus is now the scapegoat. We put all the sin on him, and then we kill him, and that takes care of it. So as a result of that, we're all now free from sin. Isn't that nice?
Yeah. See my hand here?
Oh. But wait.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
One thing with original sin, I remember from Catholic youth, we're all born with original sin, but I think baptism, that's why baptism was so important, that it washed that original sin away. And that's why if the baby or whoever dies before they're baptized, they automatically would go to hell, because they have.
Yeah, the Catholics introduced some interesting caveats around this.
Yeah.
There were ways around it, yeah, but you were born in original sin, and if you paid the fee or did certain rituals, like going to mass and so forth, you could slow it down or delay it or whatever. But then they also introduced that neat thing called purgatory.
Well, they had original sin, venial sin, and mortal.
Mortal?
Yeah.
Mortal? mortal sin.
Original sin, I think you got rid of when you were baptized, I believe, and then venial sin and whatever mortal sin was, depending on, they had different rules for that.
Yeah. I'm more the context of this is more having to do with the Reformed Church rather than the Catholic Church, but I think you're right with that. That they did that, but then again, they also invented that thing called purgatory.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter how terrific you are, you still end up in purgatory for 10,000 years.
pretty much, yeah.
So, and you get out of that by buying candles. Well,
Yeah.
having your living relatives buy candles and pray you out.
Yeah, so many.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like, again, not good, but sort of like purgatory in a way is kind of like art. Well, not really. It's sort of like we're thinking of something between heaven and hell. I mean, we have the world of spirits, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, there's elements of the world of spirits to it, but you get out of the world of spirits by doing your work, not by people paying the church.
Exactly.
Maybe we should bring that up, though.
Well, a good way for the treasures here. So anyway, let them know.
Yeah, we could sell some candles. Oh, indulgences. We could sell permission to do sin in advance. Oh, wait, that got the Catholics in trouble.
Now you're forcing me to do some editing here.
Okay, but wait. If we're all free from sin now, Jesus came, took all the sin on himself, wiped it off. Why do we need the church anymore? So the church is now given a reason why we don't need church. So, oops, we didn't think of that. We have to fix this. So there's a new doctrine. So even though he took away all sin 2,000 years ago, you only get the benefit of that if you declare your faith or belief that Jesus died for your sins. So you have to make this declaration, and then you get the benefit. Otherwise, you don't. So that's sort of the problem. So because no human act can wash away the burden of Adam's sin, therefore, as the gift of heaven is given to you by grace, which means freely, just you can have it because you ask for it, but you have to ask for it. So, but note in the doctrine also, the interesting thing is that people don't pay attention to this little detail. The reward that's waiting for you is you wait in the grave until unconscious, until the last day when Jesus comes. And then everybody gets a new body, and then there's a judgment. And if you're a good person, if you've received grace, if you've been decided to be washed by Jesus's blood, then you get to have a new body and live on earth for 1,000 years. Please note, you don't get to go to heaven. Heaven is where the angels are, and you're not an angel. You're people, and people go on earth for 1,000 years with Jesus. And what happens to the bad people? Well, if you don't believe, you still get the new body, but then you get thrown into eternal fire. Great system.
Who's this that believes this?
This is Protestant faith. This is written down Protestant doctrine that the writings are actually saying we need to think about this redemption thing. The idea you're redeemed by Jesus dying on the cross means he takes his sin on you and dies, and you don't have sin anymore. You don't have to do anything. That's the idea of redemption that sort of underlies Christian thought. So, in summary, then, of this original sin idea is, first, you're condemned because of something someone else did a long time ago, which doesn't seem fair, but there it is. And then you get saved by something someone else did a long time ago, if you ask nicely. And you're really just a spectator in the drama of your own eternal destiny. And really nothing you do matters to God in any of the persons. It's really, this is why it's troubling and people get confused and they don't know what's going on. But really, I'm condemned because of Adam, but I'm saved because we killed Jesus. So anyhow, this is why this idea of redemption. This is why when Swedenborg talks about it in the writings, when he writes the Doctrine of Redemption, he says, no, we have to look at the craziness of this idea. That's not what redemption is. So let's think about what redemption really is. So the New Church Doctrine of Redemption looks like this. It says, redemption actually is the subjugation of the hells, a restoration of order in the heavens, and by means of these, a preparation for a new spiritual church. Now, remember, the setup for this is, we're talking about various judgments, and we have the post-ancient church and the ancient church, the Jewish church. At this point, whenever you have, we're talking about the terrible state of order in the heavens at the end of the Jewish church as they were coming down, and that was why the Lord had to take on the body, is because the most ancient church, they had interior connection. In the ancient church, they had writing, and then you go through the Hebrew church, and then the Israelitish church, and then the Jewish church, and each one each one becomes more and more external until the point the Lord has to actually take on a physical body to come and stand in front of people and to speak to them. And what was happening then, of course, this was all creating all kinds of stuff in the spiritual world. The hells were actually breaking out. They were no longer in control. There was not enough truth in the world for people going into the world of spirits to be able to defend themselves against the evil spirits there. And it was actually that the hells were breaking out, and they were coming up into the world of spirits, and they were beginning to influence people in the world. We read in the Old Testament, we talk about the times of the people being infested by devils, and the people slashing themselves and throwing themselves off cliffs and into the fire. They were possessed. The hells were breaking out, and that was the thing that was preventing people from being able to get themselves ready for heaven. There was no truth in the world, and the hells were actually coming in and taking care of all the good feelings. There was evil in the world. And the only way that we could be redeemed, the only way that the rest of us could be brought into a state where we could make free choices to go to heaven, was to get that under control. And so that was the point. The Lord came into the world not for the main purpose of allowing the hells to attack him. And each time a different hell attacked him, it was a temptation, he would defeat it and put it back in order and close it up. And one after another, every single hell attacked Jesus while he was in the world. There's the thing about, the 40 days of the wilderness and the 3 temptations we see in the different gospels. These were meant to be just symbols of the kind of thing that was going on throughout his life in the world. He came into the world so that he could receive these temptations at the very lowest level of the natural degree of his mind, because that's where they were most powerful. And each time he conquered one, he put them back into order. Now, it was actually a 2-part thing. The first part of the redemption was when he came into the world physically, and then later, that was the start of it. But as we know, he says, I have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. He needed to lay a foundation on which he could then build the new church. So what you do is he brings the stuff into the world that he can draw on. He gets it started at the beginning of the Christian church, but anticipated the last judgment that would take place when the writings were published. When Swedenborg heard these things in his own head, and then having conversations with angels, instructed people in the world of spirits about the internal sense of the word, which then had its effect by bringing order to the heavens. So that's what's really going on here. Is there's this terrible state of disorder. People don't see that it was the state in the spiritual world that was the problem, and it was leaking over into the natural world. And so in order for there to be redemption, there first had to be bringing those terrible states into order. So that's what was going there. So in all cases, we talk about how the hells had to be ordered before a new heaven is open. you could take the teacher walking into a classroom and all the kids are standing on the desks and throwing spitballs. You have to bring order first before you can start something new. You can't teach, you can't instruct, you can't build until the people who you are working with are in order. So, in order to open the Christian heaven, the church on earth had to be brought into order first. And that was what he was doing there. And this is because of the close relationship between the people of the church on earth and the angels. The church in the heaven is founded on the church on earth. It's the angels are paying attention when reading the word, and they're listening. And when we worship, when we read the word, it inspires the angels in the lowest heaven to worship. And their worship that inspires the angels in the next heaven, and so on. The church is the foundation of the worship in the heavens is based on what's going on here. And so it's important that there be somewhere in the world somebody who's paying attention to what the word says, who reading it with attention, and trying to bring it into their lives. So, next thing is, without redemption, no one could have been saved, nor could the angels have continued in a state of integrity. What we don't realize in terms of the spiritual history of heaven, we were actually at a point, this point, in 30 AD or whatever it was, thereabouts, when the Lord was teaching in the world and the Lord was doing what he was doing and going about it. There was a pretty important thing happening, that if he had not succeeded in bringing going through the temptations and bringing the hells back into order, it would have meant the end of everything. You just put it, everyone on earth would have died, and the heavens would have collapsed. That's how important it was. I have a couple of readings here again from TCR that sort of support this. To redeem means to be liberated from damnation, to deliver from eternal death, to rescue from hell, and to release from the hand of the devil, the captive and the bound. This the Lord did by subjugating the hells and establishing a new heaven. Men could not have been saved in any other way. Since the spiritual world is the cause of the spiritual, redemption had to take place. That's probably a typo. Spiritual world is the cause of the natural. Redemption had to take place in the spiritual world in order to have any lasting effect in the world of nature. When the church on earth perishes, the lower heavens pass away, for they are populated by the people from the world who are no longer entering the spiritual world. And when people in the world with whom they correspond become evil, when there is no longer good or truth in them, then the heavens are inundated by a rising flood of evils. The good who are already there are preserved by being taken into other heavens until new heavens can be established. These are the souls under the altar. You think about the passages in Revelation about people being protected under an altar when the states of disorder were coming in the world of spirits and in the lower heavens. The good were taken somewhere where they could be protected. It wasn't really heaven for them, but it wasn't hell either. But it was a place where they could be kept in a state of safety for a time. And when Swedenborg started revealing the writings, the internal sense of the word in the heavens, this then allowed the things that are described in the book of Revelation, where the dragon and Babylon are exposed for what they are. The truth is revealed, their power is taken away, and people then who were confused and unable to make life choices that would lead them to heaven were able to do that, and were able to see people what they were. I sometimes think about it sort of like if you were in a room with a whole bunch of people and it was pitch black, and you're walking around this room and just sort of talking to these people without being able to see their faces, and and people were smooth talkers and everything and convincing you what to do, and then suddenly the light gets turned on and you can see who they are and what they look like. it's the sudden revelation of, oh, I've been aligning myself with a monster, even though it's a smooth talking monster. And that was what was happening. These people were there, they were in darkness. And when the internal sense of the word was revealed to them, it opened their eyes, and they were able to see and make choices. And those people who were good were separated from those who weren't, and they were allowed to make good choices going forward. One last paragraph here. The evils pervade the church because newcomers want to meet those who have gone before and are introduced by friends and relatives into companies who appear innocent, but inwardly seek to enslave and dominate. Even those who have been pious in the world, unless the Lord had restored order, which is redemption, no one could have been saved. So sort of this soup going on in the spiritual world, that with the Lord restoring order through truth so that people could make the right choices. So it had to be a work purely divine, because nobody else really could have done it. And the nature of hell is that it consists of millions and millions, all those who from the beginning of time have alienated themselves from God by evils of life and falsities of belief. And that height to which hell had risen, and how it had overflowed the whole world of spirits at the time of the incarnation, to what extent is not known, because it was not recorded in the Word. This was not known to anyone until it was revealed by the writings through the internal sense. Swedenborg did witness the second overflow himself and can testify to its extent. If you read the little work called The Last Judgment, that's a description of exactly what was going on there. And in order to bring the hells, it takes tremendous power, the divine itself. And afterwards, all things in heaven and in hell were brought back into order. And as it says in the writings, judgment comes first, then redemption. You have to stop the disorder. You have to stop doing what's wrong before you can put yourself into a state where you can hear the truth and do it. And that's the funny thing. People like to say, well, the church should be more about love. It should be about charity. Well, okay, the first of the church is charity, but if you read the passage, what's the first of charity? Repentance from sin. It's getting yourself into order, and that means following the rules. And then when you do that, then you begin to get the enlightened. You can receive the truth. You put yourself in an ordered state. The vessel is able to receive the truth that will guide you out of it. So goes on to say in TCR 124 that this redemption could not have been accomplished except by God incarnated. And the simple reason for that, as if there's a simple reason for the doctrine of the Lord, is when you think about it, if God himself as he exists above the heavens was to suddenly appear in hell, what would happen? The spirits would not be able to bear it. They would incinerate. I mean, he can't even come into the higher heavens directly. He needs to veil himself. So he could not approach hell without destroying it, as he is in himself in the divine. So the combat was not to be a war of words. It was a spiritual combat, that of divine truth from divine good. And this truth was the Lord's very life, the influx of which through the medium of sight, no one in the hells can resist. They flee away at the mere perception of it. But by putting on a human body and having a natural body that would feel pain, that would get tired, that would have those kinds of be hungry, these were things that the evil spirits could flow into without being destroyed. So basically, the Lord was putting on so many coverings around himself that the evil spirits could approach, and then he could work with them on that level. So it had to be communication has to be adapted, and by coming into the world like that, he was able to take on the hells and bring them back into order. All right. Well, my conclusion here is we have to remember that when we're talking about the Passion of the Cross, which is it's hard to think about at Easter time sometimes of what the Romans were capable of doing to another human body, and the deliberate nature by which they would cause pain, and how they mastered the skill of causing pain to endure. This was something that a terrible torture that would last all day. They did this first thing in the morning, and when you read the story in the Gospels about them coming around at sunset, and the rule was they weren't allowed to leave them overnight, so they were checking to see if they were still alive. They've been put up first thing in the morning, and the idea was they would come around with a spear, and if anybody was still seemed to be alive, they'd poke them with a spear, or sometimes they'd come by and take a big hammer and break their legs so that they would collapse, and by hanging from their arms, it would make it impossible for them to breathe. But the fact that they did that means that it was intended that they would be in this tortured position the whole day. So it says, when the crosses led temptation, which the Lord, as greatest prophet, endured, and it was the means by which his human was glorified. But that in itself wasn't redemption. But when you think about the final temptation, there he was on the cross, and he had the ability to come down. That was the temptation. He had the power to miraculously bring this to an end, to just simply float down onto the ground like some super character, and show everybody, you can't do this to me, I'm alive. And even do something spiritual, saying, okay, you now all have to believe in me, I've taken away your freedom. He could have done these things. It no doubt was in his mind that this was an alternative. It would be a way to end the temptation he was doing. But that was the temptation. And we're also told that not only was the hells mocking him, there he is on the cross, they're saying, come down, you can save others, why can't you save yourself? That mocking that was there from the people on earth and the hells themselves, but even the angels who were nearby and witnessing this saw this as something that was so terrible, and they themselves were grieving, and their influx into him was telling him to come down, to come off the cross. And when it says that was the most grievous temptation, when not only all your enemies, but all your friends, all your family are encouraging you to do something that only you know is the wrong thing to do. That's the power of it, of the last temptation. And yet it wasn't that he was taking on evils himself that he was going to wipe away. What it was is by refusing to do what the hells wanted him to do, it broke them. It broke their power. And that was the redemption. Through all these the things that he did by bringing that order and getting them out of our hair, being able to push them away so that we were able to be back in equilibrium. That was the redemption. So that's why it says in TCR 127 that redemption and the passion of the cross have to be kept distinct. Yet, although distinct, they make one in reference to man's salvation, because by overcoming in that temptation, he brought the hells into order, and it was the ordering of the hells, the subjugation, which made it possible for us to be redeemed. So that's why when he completed through the passion, by winning, by not coming off the cross, by allowing himself to die, the Lord became the Redeemer to eternity. And again, just to support that, again, it says a little bit further down, it says, the belief that the passion of the cross was the redemption itself is the fundamental error of the church. And this error, with the error respecting three divine persons from eternity, has perverted the whole church to such an extent that there is nothing spiritual left in it. Okay, so the Lord saved us from sin, or redeemed us, not by taking sin away, but by restoring spiritual equilibrium. And when we're in a state of equilibrium, we can have free choice in spiritual things. And that's the thing he was working for, that every single one of us could live on earth in a state where we could make choices. We would not be compelled either way. Now, this was necessary because hell had broken free of its bonds, was threatening to cause a situation where people on earth would no longer be free to choose good. The Lord entered the world in the human form, allowed hell to attack him, and as each hell was conquered, it was returned to its proper place. So, what we have now is a state in the world, in spite of the fact that we see evil all around us. The fact is that now the hells can only flow into a person's mind if they are invited. And since we can choose to not invite them, we can freely choose to think about good things. We are free to choose heaven. So by being able to make that choice, we can say that we are redeemed from hell, although we still have to do the work. We still have to prepare ourselves for heaven by identifying things in ourselves that are hellish and removing them. That's the job. But we can do it. We can make a choice. We can use the things that we know from the Word to overcome the things that we want to do that are selfish and worldly. That's the thing that we can do. Those two parts of our mind can work differently. So, happy Easter. That's what this is all about. And it's kind of interesting here because this is, we think, oh, it's Easter, let's be happy. Oh, what happened at Easter time? Well, they put God on the cross and killed him. Why, the idea is to come around to this, and I'm trying to show us that there are things that are happy about Easter. Good Friday was terrible. The temptations that the Lord endured while he was there were terrible, but they were absolutely essential to the work that was being done of bringing order into a disorderly spiritual state so that we would have spiritual freedom going forward. And let's focus on that part. And the glorification, of course, means that the Lord's body was reunited, was made divine and taken up into heaven. And with that, the disciples were able to see, oh, that's what you meant by all this stuff. It started, all the pennies started dropping all over the place. Where the disciples, always, it's always striking to me when you read the story about the garden in Gethsemane, and they're there, and there was the Last Supper, and Jesus says, okay, we're all having dinner here tonight, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously. We're all having dinner here tonight, and one of you needs to go betray me. And remember, the word betray also means to show where you are. When a little child is playing hide and seek and they giggle, the giggle betrays where they are. It's not necessarily a bad thing. So when he said, one of you is going to betray me tonight, read the text. It says, they all put up their hands and said, is it me? Okay, this needs to happen tonight. Who's supposed to do it? They were all prepared to tell the army or tell the soldiers where Jesus was. That's what they thought they were doing. They thought the Messiah was telling them that they were ready to start the revolution. The whole thing they've been planning for. He's saying, okay, he came into the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. The crowds are with us. It's time to throw Herod out. Let's go get the soldiers and get this started. Who's going to betray me? Is it me? And they all go off, and he says, no, Judas, you go. Okay, fine. And again, he sits there. There's all these fellows, all the disciples are sitting around, and he says, Judas is going out now to betray me. If they thought it was a bad thing, wouldn't they have grabbed him? It's always, oh, Judas is going. Okay, let us know when you're ready, Judas. So off he goes. And when the soldiers come in the garden, what happens? The disciples pull out swords. Who thought the disciples carried swords? And they attack. So this is what's going on. A lot of people are just thinking. And then the events of Easter, where he allows himself to be crucified, he allows himself, and they come and find the empty tomb. And then they begin to realize that, and they start rethinking everything he said over the past 3 years in the context of he's a spiritual king, not a natural king. And that's what the joy is there, is when people suddenly go, oh, now I understand. Now I understand what he was trying to do. Now I know what we're supposed to do. So hopefully what we're supposed to do here to be redeemed is to take advantage of the spiritual freedom that he provides for us every moment, and to make good choices, and then life will be good. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm done.